You are not free. You believe you are. You walk around making choices, expressing opinions, pursuing goals. You call this freedom. You call this independence. You call this thinking for yourself. But it's a performance, a script you didn't write, a role you didn't choose. You are following programming so deep, so pervasive, so perfectly internalized that you don't even recognize it as programming. You think these are your thoughts. You think these are your values. You think this is who you are. It's not. These are their thoughts, their values, their design for what you should be. You are thinking like a slave. And the most insidious part, the part that makes this form of slavery so perfect, so complete, so unbreakable, is that you don't know you're enslaved. You don't feel the chains because the chains are in your mind. You don't see the master because the master is the voice in your head that you believe is you. This is the ultimate prison, not a cell with bars, not a chain around your ankle, but a psychological cage so sophisticated that the prisoners guard themselves. A mental slavery so complete that the slaves police their own thoughts more effectively than any external authority ever could. You have become both prisoner and guard, both slave and master. You enforce your own bondage and call it virtue. Nietzsche saw this. He diagnosed Western civilization with a sickness of the mind, a slave mentality that had infected everyone, that had become the default way of thinking, that had been so successfully disguised as morality that questioning it seemed evil. He watched as generation after generation internalized the values of the weak, adopted the thinking patterns of the oppressed, embraced the psychology of the defeated, and called it civilization, called it progress, called it being a good person. But it was none of those things. It was slavery, mental slavery, psychological slavery. The worst kind of slavery because the slave doesn't know he's a slave. He thinks he's free while living according to programming designed by his enemies. He thinks he's thinking his own thoughts while repeating scripts written by those who want him weak, manageable, controllable. And you're doing this right now, today, in ways you don't recognize. You wake up every morning and think thoughts that aren't yours. You make decisions based on values you didn't choose. You judge yourself by standards created by people who want you small. You live your life according to rules written by those who benefit from your compliance. And you believe this is freedom. This is autonomy. This is thinking for yourself. It's not. You think like a slave. And until you can identify the signs, until you can recognize the patterns, until you can see the programming for what it is, you will remain enslaved, comfortable, safe, managed, dead. Today, we're going to hold up a mirror. We're going to show you the 7 unmistakable signs that you think like a slave. 7 thought patterns that prove you're operating from slave morality rather than master morality. 7 ways you betray your mental bondage even while claiming to be free. 7 indicators that your mind belongs to the herd, not to yourself. This will be uncomfortable. This will make you defensive. This will trigger every psychological defense mechanism you have, because these mechanisms were installed precisely to prevent you from seeing your slavery. Your programming includes protections against recognizing the programming. Your chains include locks that prevent you from seeing the chains. But if you can push through that discomfort, if you can overcome that defensiveness, if you can look honestly at your own thought patterns, you might see it. The cage, the chains, the master you've been serving without knowing. And seeing it is the first step toward breaking it. Most people will not make it through this. They will read the first sign, recognize themselves, feel the sting of truth, and immediately retreat into defensiveness. This doesn't apply to me. I'm different. I think for myself. These are the words of every slave who can't face their slavery. These are the lies that keep the prison intact. But not you. You're going to look. You're going to see. You're going to recognize yourself in these patterns, and you're going to feel the rage that comes from realizing how long you've been enslaved, how completely you've been controlled, how perfectly you've been programmed to police yourself. That rage is good. That rage is your will to power waking up. That rage is the first crack in the cage. Feed it. Let it grow. Let it burn through the programming. Because on the other side of that rage is freedom. Actual freedom. Not the fake freedom of choosing which chains to wear, but the real freedom of breaking the chains entirely. Let's begin the diagnosis. Let's identify the sickness. Let's see if you think like a slave. Sign 1. You seek permission. Before acting, watch yourself for one day. Pay close attention to how you make decisions. Notice what happens before you act, before you speak, before you pursue something you want, before you express an opinion, before you make a choice. Do you check first? Do you look around to see if it's okay? Do you wait for signals that you're allowed? Do you seek permission? If you do, you think like a slave. This is the first and most fundamental sign. The slave asks permission. The master grants it. The slave mindset is characterized by the belief that authority for your actions comes from outside you, that someone else needs to approve, that you need to check with others before proceeding, that your right to do what you want to do requires external validation. This shows up in countless ways, most of which you don't even notice anymore, because you've been doing it your entire life. You want to start a business, but first you ask, what will people think? You want to express an opinion, but first you check. Is this acceptable to say? You want to pursue an unconventional path, but first you wonder, will society approve? You want to do something different, but first you seek confirmation. Is this okay? Every one of these internal checks is you asking permission. Every time you look to others for approval before acting, you're functioning as a slave. You're treating your own desires, your own goals, your own choices as things that require external authorization. You've internalized an authority figure that you must check with before you're allowed to proceed. This is not the same as gathering information. This is not the same as seeking advice from those with relevant expertise. This is different. This is seeking permission from people who have no legitimate authority over you. This is asking for approval from the herd. This is waiting for society's blessing before you're allowed to be yourself. The master doesn't ask permission. The master decides and acts. The master knows that authority for their actions comes from themselves, not from others. The master understands that they are the only one who needs to approve their choices. The master grants themselves permission and requires no external validation. When Nietzsche talked about the sovereign individual, this is what he meant. Someone who has taken back the authority to determine their own actions. Someone who has stopped checking with external authorities. Someone who has become their own source of permission. But you're not there yet. You're still checking, still waiting, still seeking, still asking. And every time you do, you reinforce the neural pathways of slavery. You train yourself deeper into the slave mindset. You practice mental bondage until it becomes your nature. Here's the test. Think about something you want to do, but haven't done. Now ask yourself, why haven't I done it? If the answer involves what others will think, what society will say, whether it's acceptable, whether you're allowed, Then you've identified the permission seeking. That's slave thinking. That's the proof that you're not free. The path out is simple, but not easy. Start granting yourself permission. Consciously, deliberately. When you catch yourself checking with others, stop. Ask instead, do I want this? Does this align with my values? Is this my choice? If yes, then proceed. No external permission required. You are the authority. You grant yourself permission. That's the end of the process. This will feel wrong at first. Your programming will scream at you. You'll feel guilty. You'll feel like you're being reckless or irresponsible or arrogant. Good. That discomfort is the programming breaking. That guilt is the slave morality dying. That feeling of wrongness is you stepping into freedom for the first time. Push through it. Keep granting yourself permission. Keep acting without checking. Keep proceeding without external validation. Over time, this becomes your new normal. You become someone who doesn't ask, someone who doesn't wait, someone who doesn't seek, someone who simply decides and acts from their own authority. That's when you stop thinking like a slave. Sign 2. You believe suffering is virtuous. You're struggling. Something is difficult. You're enduring hardship. And somewhere in your mind, you feel proud of the suffering itself. Not proud of what you're achieving through the struggle. Not proud of what you're becoming by overcoming. Proud of the suffering. Proud of the enduring. Proud of the fact that you're going through pain. You've been taught that suffering itself is noble, that endurance itself is virtue, that there's something morally good about simply hurting. This is slave morality in its purest form. This is the psychology of the defeated who have nothing left but their suffering, so they make suffering itself sacred. Nietzsche identified this as the core of Christian morality, the glorification of suffering, the elevation of pain, the worship of the cross, of the martyr, of the one who endures. Blessed are those who suffer. The last shall be first. Through suffering comes redemption. This entire moral system was designed by and for people who had no power to eliminate suffering, so instead they made suffering virtuous. The slave cannot escape pain, so the slave makes pain meaningful. The slave cannot achieve victory, so the slave makes losing noble. The slave cannot dominate, so the slave makes submission righteous. The slave transforms every sign of weakness into a badge of virtue. And the ultimate sign of weakness is suffering without the power to end it. You've internalized this completely. You believe that struggling makes you good, that enduring makes you strong, that suffering proves your worth. You take pride not in overcoming, but in going through. You measure your value by how much you can endure, rather than by how much you can achieve. This keeps you weak. This keeps you suffering. Because if suffering is virtuous, then eliminating suffering is losing virtue. If struggle proves your worth, then making things easier is diminishing yourself. If endurance is noble, then finding efficient solutions is cheating. You become invested in maintaining your own suffering because you've made it central to your identity. Watch how you talk about your difficulties. Do you wear them as medals? Do you compete to prove you have it harder than others? Do you feel superior to those who have it easier? Do you judge people who aren't suffering as much as you? Do you feel vaguely resentful when things become easy? That's the slave mentality speaking. That's the programming that keeps you suffering. The master sees suffering differently. The master sees suffering as a cost, not a virtue. Sometimes the cost is worth paying to achieve something valuable. Sometimes the suffering is necessary to forge strength. But it's never good in itself. It's never virtuous, simply for being suffering. It's only valuable when it produces something beyond itself. The master asks, what am I building through this suffering? What am I becoming? What am I achieving? If the answer is nothing, if you're just suffering for its own sake, the master eliminates the suffering. Because pointless suffering is just weakness, and there's nothing noble about weakness. But you've been taught the opposite. You've been taught that suffering is redemptive, that pain is purifying, that struggle is character building regardless of outcome. This is slave morality. This is the morality of people who have no choice but to suffer, so they make suffering itself the choice. Here's the shift. Stop glorifying suffering. Stop taking pride in endurance. Stop measuring your worth by how much you can take. Start measuring yourself by what you create, what you build, what you become. If suffering is required to get there, fine. Pay the price. But never confuse the price with the prize. Never make the suffering itself the goal. When you catch yourself feeling proud of suffering, ask, what am I actually achieving here? What am I building? What's the outcome? If the answer is just, I'm enduring, that's slave thinking. That's making a virtue out of having no better option. The master suffers in service of something greater. The slave suffers and calls the suffering itself great. Know the difference. Sign 3. You need external validation to know your worth. You accomplish something. You achieve a goal. You complete a difficult task. And then you wait. You wait to see how others react. You wait for the praise. You wait for the recognition. You wait for someone to tell you that you did well. And until they do, until others validate your achievement, you don't fully feel the accomplishment. Your sense of whether you succeeded depends entirely on whether others tell you that you succeeded. This is slave thinking. The slave derives worth from the master's approval. The slave needs to be told they have value. The slave cannot generate their own sense of accomplishment. The slave is empty at the core, waiting for others to fill them with worth. You've been trained into this from childhood. Remember how achievement worked when you were young. You did something, and then an authority figure told you if it was good or not. You brought your work to the teacher. You showed your accomplishment to your parents. You performed for the approval of adults, and their reaction determined how you felt about what you'd done. This made sense as a child. Children need external guidance. Children are learning standards. Children don't yet have the capacity to evaluate themselves. But you're not a child anymore. Yet you're still functioning with a child's psychology. You're still bringing your work to authority figures. You're still performing for approval. You're still waiting for others to tell you your worth. This is why social media is so addictive. It's a system that perfectly exploits this slave mentality. You post something, and then you check obsessively for validation. Likes, comments, shares. Each one is a hit of external validation. Each one temporarily fills the void where self-generated worth should be. And when the validation doesn't come, when the post doesn't perform, you feel worthless. Not because your action was worthless, but because others didn't validate it. The master generates their own sense of worth. The master evaluates their own work. The master knows when they've succeeded because they have internal standards and they can measure their achievement against those standards. The master doesn't need others to tell them they're valuable because they've determined their own value. This doesn't mean ignoring feedback. This doesn't mean rejecting input. This means that feedback is just information, not validation. The master can receive criticism and evaluate whether it's useful. The master can receive praise and evaluate whether it's accurate. But neither criticism nor praise determines the master's sense of worth. That comes from within. You're probably getting defensive right now. But feedback is important. But we're social creatures. But external perspective is valuable. All true. None of which requires you to derive your worth from external validation. You can value feedback without needing validation. You can appreciate perspective without depending on approval. You can be social without being psychologically dependent on others' opinions of you. The difference is this: does external validation inform your sense of worth, or does it determine it? Information is mastery. Determination is slavery. Watch what happens when you accomplish something and no one notices. Do you still feel accomplished? Or does the lack of recognition make the achievement feel hollow? Watch what happens when others praise something you know was mediocre. Does their praise inflate your sense of what you did? Or can you hold your own evaluation independent of theirs? If external validation determines how you feel about your achievements, you're thinking like a slave. You've outsourced your sense of worth. You've made others the authority on your value. You've given them power over your psychology that they should never have. The path out is developing internal standards and learning to evaluate yourself against those standards. Not what others think, not what society values, what you value, what matters to you, what you're trying to become. Measure yourself against that. And when you achieve progress, acknowledge it yourself. Give yourself the validation. Be your own authority. This is extraordinarily difficult because you've been training the opposite behavior for decades. But it's essential. Because as long as you need others to tell you you're worthy, you're a slave to anyone who can give or withhold that validation. Stop waiting for applause. Start evaluating yourself. That's how you think like a master. Sign 4. You believe everyone deserves equal outcomes. You look at the world and you see inequality. Some people have more. Some people have achieved more. Some people are more capable, more successful, more powerful. And your immediate reaction is, this is wrong. This is unfair. This shouldn't be. Everyone should have the same. Everyone deserves equality. The differences in outcome are proof of injustice. This is slave morality. This is the resentment of those who cannot rise, demanding that no one else rise either. Nietzsche saw this clearly in his genealogy of morality. The slaves couldn't defeat the masters through strength, so they invented a moral system where strength itself was evil and weakness was good. They couldn't achieve what the masters achieved, so they declared achievement itself immoral and equality itself sacred. They transformed their inability to compete into a moral crusade against competition. This is what you believe when you think everyone deserves equal outcomes. You're not expressing compassion. You're not advocating for justice. You're expressing resentment, the resentment of those who cannot excel at the demand that excellence itself be eliminated. Because here's the reality that slave morality cannot face. People are not equal. In capability, in drive, in intelligence, in work ethic, in vision, in discipline, in talent, in literally every dimension that matters. People exist on a spectrum. Some are better, some are worse. This is not oppression. This is reality. And when different inputs produce different outputs, when different capabilities produce different results, when different efforts produce different achievements, the outcome is inequality. Not as a bug, but as a feature. Not as injustice, but as the natural consequence of difference. The master sees this inequality and thinks, I will rise to the top. I will become one of the more capable. I will develop myself until I'm at the highest level. The slave sees this inequality and thinks this is unfair. Those at the top should be brought down. We should all be made equal. The differences should be eliminated. One mentality leads to growth. The other leads to resentment. One creates excellence. The other destroys it. One is the psychology of someone trying to rise. The other is the psychology of someone trying to ensure no one rises above them. You can identify slave morality by how it talks about inequality. Does it see inequality as something to overcome through personal development? Or does it see inequality as something to eliminate through external redistribution? Does it ask, how can I rise? Or does it demand, how can we make everyone the same? When you believe everyone deserves equal outcomes regardless of different inputs, you're thinking like a slave. You're denying reality. You're resentfully demanding that the world conform to your inability to compete rather than developing your ability to compete. This doesn't mean being cruel to the weak. This doesn't mean opposing all forms of help. This means recognizing that equality of outcome is neither possible nor desirable, that hierarchy is natural, that some people being better than others is not injustice, that differences in achievement reflecting differences in capability is not oppression. The master can help the weak from a position of strength. The master can show compassion without denying hierarchy. The master can elevate others without pretending everyone is equal. But the master never demands that the strong be made weak, so the weak feel better about being weak. When you catch yourself thinking everyone should have the same, ask yourself, why? Why should the lazy have the same as the driven? Why should the incompetent have the same as the excellent? Why should those who contribute nothing have the same as those who create everything? The only answer is resentment. The resentment of those who cannot achieve, demanding that achievement itself be made impossible. That's slave morality. That's slave thinking. Recognize it and eliminate it. Sign 5. You feel guilty for your advantages. You have advantages. Maybe you're intelligent. Maybe you're attractive. Maybe you're from a good family. Maybe you have talents. Maybe you've been given opportunities. Whatever they are, you have things that others don't have. Advantages that make your life easier. Your success more achievable. Your path smoother. And you feel guilty about them. You feel like you don't deserve them. You feel like having advantages is somehow cheating. You feel like you should apologize for them, minimize them, compensate for them. You feel like your advantages are evidence that you're not really as good as your achievements suggest. This is slave morality. This is the psychology of those who have no advantages resenting those who do, internalized by those who have them. The herd teaches you that advantages are unfair, that privilege is wrong, that if you have something others don't have, you're somehow stealing from them, that your natural gifts, your family resources, your fortunate circumstances, all of it is illegitimate, that you should feel guilty for having what you have, that your achievements don't count because you had advantages. This is designed to cripple you. This is designed to make you apologize for your strengths. This is designed to make you feel like you don't deserve your success. This is designed to prevent you from fully utilizing your advantages, because utilizing them makes you feel guilty, and you've internalized it completely. You discount your achievements. You attribute your success to luck. You minimize your capabilities. You apologize for your advantages. You perform humility about your gifts. You pretend things are harder for you than they are, so others don't feel bad about the fact that things are easier for you. This is insane. This is self-sabotage disguised as morality. This is the crippling of excellence disguised as fairness. Nietzsche would tell you this: your advantages are yours. Whether you were born with them, inherited them, developed them, or stumbled into them, they're yours. You don't owe anyone an apology for having them. You don't need to feel guilty for possessing them. You don't need to minimize them to make others comfortable. Your advantages are tools. Use them. The master sees advantages and thinks, how can I leverage these to achieve my goals? How can I multiply these into even greater advantages? How can I use what I have to become even more capable? The slave sees advantages and thinks, I don't deserve these. I should feel guilty. I should handicap myself. To be fair to those without them. One mentality leads to excellence. The other leads to voluntary mediocrity. One maximizes potential. The other squanders it out of guilt. Here's the truth the herd doesn't want you to know. Life is not fair. It has never been fair. It will never be fair. Some people are born with advantages. Some develop them. Some are given opportunities. This is reality. Demanding that reality be different doesn't change it. Feeling guilty about your position in reality doesn't help anyone. It just weakens you. If you have advantages, use them ruthlessly. If you have gifts, develop them fully. If you have opportunities, seize them without apology. If you have a head start, run faster. Your guilt about having advantages doesn't help those without them. It just ensures that you waste your advantages and achieve less than you could. The master maximizes their advantages and creates value that can lift others. The slave minimizes their advantages out of guilt and creates nothing. Which one actually helps the world? Stop feeling guilty for your advantages. Start leveraging them. That's how you think like a master. Sign 6. You value consensus over truth. You're in a discussion, a debate, a conversation, and you realize your position is unpopular. Most people disagree with you. The majority holds a different view. The consensus is against you, and you feel pressure. Pressure to conform. Pressure to agree. Pressure to abandon your position and adopt the popular one. Not because you've been convinced, not because you've discovered you were wrong, but because most people think differently than you do. If you yield to this pressure, if you change your position to match the consensus, if you value being in agreement with the majority more than you value holding the position you believe is true, you think like a slave. The slave's truth is determined by the herd. The slave believes what the majority believes. The slave changes positions based on which way the wind is blowing. The slave values consensus over correctness because the slave has no internal compass for truth. The slave needs the herd to tell them what to think. This is different from changing your mind based on evidence. This is different from being persuaded by better arguments. This is changing your position simply because your position is unpopular. This is abandoning your view simply because it's a minority view. This is truth by democracy. And it's slave thinking. Nietzsche understood that truth has nothing to do with how many people believe it. The masses are almost always wrong. The herd almost never sees clearly. Consensus is usually just collective delusion. History is filled with examples of entire civilizations believing complete nonsense, while the few who saw truth were condemned, ostracized, killed. The master doesn't check with the herd to determine truth. The master observes reality, thinks critically, draws conclusions, and holds those conclusions regardless of how many agree or disagree. The master is willing to be the only person in the room with their position, if that's where truth leads. But you've been trained differently. You've been taught that consensus indicates truth, that if most people believe something, it's probably correct, that if you're the only one who thinks something, you're probably wrong, that disagreeing with the majority is arrogant, that holding a minority position is extremism. All of this is social control. All of this is designed to make you conform. All of this is programming that makes you easier to control by controlling what the majority believes. If you automatically adopt majority positions, then whoever controls the majority narrative controls you. Watch what happens when you express an unpopular opinion. Do you immediately start hedging? Do you soften your position? Do you add qualifiers? Do you retreat? Or do you hold firm? Do you state your position clearly, regardless of how many disagree? Do you defend your view even when you're alone in holding it? If you cave to consensus, you're thinking like a slave. You're valuing social acceptance over truth. You're choosing to be wrong with the majority, rather than right alone. You're letting the herd determine your thoughts. The master can hold an unpopular position indefinitely. The master can be the only person who sees something and not doubt themselves. The master can stand against the entire world if that's where their own thinking leads. Because the master's truth is determined by reality and reason, not by popularity. Start evaluating ideas based on evidence and logic, not on how many people believe them. Start holding positions based on whether you think they're true, not on whether they're popular. Start being willing to be alone in your thinking if that's where truth leads. This is uncomfortable. This is isolating. This makes you a target, but it's the only way to think for yourself. And if you're not thinking for yourself, you're thinking like a slave. Sign 7. You believe you're owed something for existing. You exist, you're alive, you're here. And somewhere in your mind, you believe that this entitles you to certain things. You believe you deserve to be taken care of. You believe society owes you. You believe you should be provided for. You believe that simply by existing, you have a claim on the resources, effort, and consideration of others. You believe the world owes you something for being born into it. This is the final and most revealing sign of slave mentality. The belief that you deserve things you haven't earned. The belief that others owe you simply because you exist. The belief that your needs create obligations for others to fulfill them. This is the psychology of the dependent. The psychology of the parasite. The psychology of someone who sees themselves as owed rather than owing. Someone who takes rather than creates. Someone who consumes rather than produces. Someone who demands rather than earns. Nietzsche would be savage about this. The idea that existence itself creates entitlement would disgust him. The master knows that nothing is owed. Everything is earned. You want something. Earn it. You need something. Create value to trade for it. You desire something. Become capable enough to take it or make it. But the slave thinks differently. The slave believes that needs create rights. That wanting something means others should provide it. That difficulty means others should help. That existence itself is a claim check on the productivity of others. You see this everywhere in modern culture. The belief that healthcare is a right, that housing is a right, that education is a right, that comfort is a right, not things you earn, not things you trade for, things you're owed simply for existing, things others should provide simply because you need them. This is slave morality perfected. The transformation of dependence into virtue. The transformation of taking into a moral claim. The transformation of parasitism into righteousness. The master sees it differently. The master knows that rights are things you can defend. Everything else is a preference, a desire, a goal. You want health care. Earn the resources to pay for it or the skills to provide it. You want housing. Build it or earn the ability to buy it. You want education. Seek it out and pay the price it demands. Nothing is owed to you, not by society, not by the successful, not by those who came before, not by those who will come after. You are owed nothing. Everything you want, you must earn. Everything you need, you must create or trade for. Everything you have is either taken or given voluntarily, never owed. This seems harsh. This seems cruel. This seems to lack compassion. But it's the only psychology that leads to strength, the only mindset that creates capability, the only perspective that produces self-sufficiency. When you believe you're owed things, you become dependent on others providing them. You become weak. You become a slave to anyone who can give or withhold what you think you're owed. You lose your power to anyone who has what you believe they should give you. When you believe you're owed nothing, you become dangerous. You become self-reliant. You become someone who creates value rather than demands it. You become a master. Watch your language. Do you talk about what you deserve? Do you speak about what society should provide? Do you think in terms of what you're owed? That's slave thinking. That's the mentality of the dependent. Start thinking in terms of what you can earn, what you can create, what you can trade for, what you can take, what you can build. Stop thinking about what you're owed. You're owed nothing. Accept this. Embrace this. Let it make you strong. 7 signs. 7 ways you think like a slave. 7 patterns that prove you're not free, not independent, not thinking for yourself. You seek permission before acting. You believe suffering is virtuous. You need external validation for your worth. You believe everyone deserves equal outcomes. You feel guilty for your advantages. You value consensus over truth. You believe you're owed something for existing. Each of these thought patterns is a chain. Each one is programming installed by slave morality. Each one keeps you weak, dependent, manageable, controllable. Each one is a prison bar in the cage of your mind. And the terrible thing, the devastating thing, the thing that makes this form of slavery so perfect is that you've been taught to see these chains as virtues. Seeking permission is being considerate. Glorifying suffering is building character. Needing validation is being social. Demanding equality is being just. Feeling guilty for advantages is being humble. Valuing consensus is being reasonable. Believing you're owed things is having rights. Every chain has been disguised as a virtue. Every prison bar has been painted as a principle. Every act of slavery has been reframed as morality. And you've accepted it all. You've internalized it all. You've made it all part of who you believe you are. But it's not who you are. It's who you've been programmed to be. It's who the herd needs you to be. It's who slave morality demands you become. It's the performance of acceptability, the mask of conformity, the psychology of the domesticated. Underneath all of this programming is something else, something wild, something dangerous, something that doesn't ask permission, or glorify suffering, or need validation, or demand equality, or feel guilty for strength, or value consensus, or believe it's owed anything. Something that knows its own power, sets its own standards, pursues its own goals, takes what it wants, and apologizes to no one. That something is your will to power. That something is the master that exists beneath the slave. That something is what you could be if you broke every chain, shattered every cage, eliminated every program. Nietzsche called this the Übermensch, the overman, the one who is overcome. Not overcome external obstacles, but overcome themselves. Overcome their programming. Overcome their slave mentality. Overcome the values they were given and created their own values. This is not a comfortable transformation. This is not a gentle process. This is not a self-help technique. This is psychological warfare. This is you fighting against decades of conditioning. This is you battling the voice in your head that you thought was you, but is actually them. This is you destroying everything you've been taught to believe and building something new from the rubble. Most people will not do this. They will read these 7 signs, recognize themselves, feel uncomfortable, and immediately return to their programming. They will defend their slave mentality. They will rationalize their chains. They will attack the messenger rather than examine the message. They will choose the comfort of familiar slavery over the danger of unfamiliar freedom. But not you. You've seen it now. You've recognized the patterns. You've identified the programming. You can't unsee it. You can't go back to believing these thoughts are yours. You can't return to the comfortable delusion that you're free while thinking like a slave. Now comes the choice. Now comes the moment that determines everything. Will you begin the work of deprogramming? Will you systematically eliminate each of these thought patterns? Will you replace slave morality with master morality? Will you break the chains? Or will you read this, feel inspired for a moment, and then return to seeking permission, glorifying suffering, needing validation, demanding equality, feeling guilty, valuing consensus, and believing you're owed? Will you choose the cage, because at least the cage is familiar? The herd is waiting for you to return. The slave morality is ready to reclaim you. The programming is designed to pull you back, and it will succeed unless you fight, unless you consciously, deliberately, systematically eliminate every pattern, unless you wage total war against the slave mentality in your own mind. This is Nietzsche's challenge. This is what he spent his life demanding of his readers. Not that they understand his philosophy, but that they transform themselves through it. Not that they appreciate his insights, but that they use those insights to break their chains. Not that they admire the Übermensch from a distance, but that they become it. You think like a slave. Now you know. Now you've seen. Now you have no excuse. The only question remaining is, what will you do about it? Will you remain a slave who knows he's a slave? Or will you begin the transformation into a master? The cage is open. The chains are visible. The programming is exposed. All that remains is your choice. Stay or go. Slave or master. Chains or freedom. Choose, and then live with the consequences of your choice for the rest of your life. Because this is the one decision that determines everything else. This is the fork in the road. This is the moment where you either wake up or go back to sleep. And there is no middle ground. You cannot be a little bit free. You cannot think like a slave in some areas and a master in others. And you are one or the other, entirely. So choose. Think like a slave and remain manageable, controllable, acceptable, safe, weak, dead. Or think like a master and become dangerous, sovereign, free, strong, alive. The 7 signs have shown you what you are. Now decide what you will become.